It's the hottest afternoon of July, and you step into a 100-year-old farmhouse. No air conditioner, no window unit, nothing humming anywhere. And the front hall is cooler than the brand new house next door that's been running its AC since breakfast. How? That old house was never cooled. It was built to beat the heat by people with no electricity who fought the sun with shape, shade, weight, and moving air. Those builders were following a handful of simple physics laws, and you can copy most of them this weekend for between nothing and $20. 4 old tricks, ranked the honest way, by how many degrees each one really drops your house and exactly which climate it works in. Because that $7 cool any room forever trick all over your feed? In half the country it does almost nothing, and you'll see the exact line on the map where it quits. Stick with me. These are old building ways brought up to date with what the building scientists actually measure. For most of history, nobody could buy cold air, so a house had to earn its comfort the way a barn or a root cellar does, by working with the sun and the night instead of against them. Deep porches, tall ceilings, thick walls, windows placed to catch a breeze. None of it was decoration. Every piece was a tool against the heat. By the end, you'll know the 4 that still work, in the order that gives you the most degrees for the least money, and the one honest catch that decides whether the famous evaporative tricks help you or just leave your house damp. And almost none of it asks a landlord's blessing or a contractor. Most of these are things a renter can set up this weekend and undo before the next move. One note: if it's your attic roasting your upstairs in particular, that's its own job. There's a separate video for it. Today we're cooling the whole house, the old way. Here's the one idea that ties this together. Heat gets into your house 3 ways. The sun shines in through roof and windows. The walls and air store that heat and hold it into the night. And without moving air, it just sits on you. So the old houses fought back in 4 moves, and the order matters. 1. Block the sun before it ever gets in. Shade and a light roof. Cheapest, biggest. 2. Let the house breathe. Cross ventilation and the stack effect for free. 3. Use the night. Heavy materials that soak up the cool dark and release it by day. 4. And only in the right climate, evaporative cooling, the wet cloth and clay pot tricks. That's the list. Most videos sell you trick number 4, the dramatic one, and never mention shade, which quietly does the most. Biggest and cheapest first. Trick 1 does the most work for the least money. Stop the sun before it ever touches the house. Here's the how. Shade the roof and the west and south windows. A tree, an awning, a deep porch, even a cheap exterior shade cloth, or just closing the blinds on the sunny side by 2 in the afternoon. And if you ever re-roof, go light instead of dark. Now the why, and the numbers are bigger than people expect. A dark roof baking in the sun can hit 150 degrees on a July afternoon. A light reflective roof stays more than 50 degrees cooler. That's why the old farmhouses were so often painted pale and roofed light. Not fashion, physics. The U.S. Department of Energy figures a cool roof cuts a home's cooling energy by roughly 10 to 30%. And the tree is the quiet champion. A shade tree cools the air around it by as much as 6 degrees. And the Department of Energy figures carefully placed shade can cut a household's cooling energy by up to 25%, for the price of a sapling and some patience. A 6-foot tree starts shading your windows the very first summer. Here's how to see it for yourself. On a hot afternoon, point a cheap infrared thermometer at a sunny west window, then at one you've shaded. The shaded glass reads cooler by a wide margin, right there on the gun. Same wall, same hour. The only difference is the sun never landed. Folks who do nothing else but shade the west windows and the roof notice the same thing by July. The afternoon heat stops pouring in around 4 o'clock, the worst hour of the day. Cost: $0 to $20 for shade cloth and blinds. A tree is a few dollars and some patience. The honest limit: Shade stops new heat from coming in. It does nothing for the heat already trapped inside, and getting that back out is tricks 2 and 3. Trick 2 is the one the old houses were literally shaped around. Let the house breathe. Here's the how. Open windows on opposite sides of the house to pull a breeze straight through. That's cross ventilation. And open something low and something high at the same time. A downstairs window and an upstairs window, or the door and a skylight. Now, the why. Hot air rises because it's lighter. Give it a high way out and it leaves on its own, pulling cooler air in down low to replace it. Builders call it the stack effect. That's what the tall ceilings, the transom windows over every door, the wide central hallway, and the cupola on the barn were all for. They turned the house into a chimney for heat. Your grandfather's house moved its own air without a single watt. You can watch it work. Hold a strip of tissue paper at the bottom of an open window on the shaded side, and another at a high window across the house. Both flutter inward and up as the air walks through. No breeze you can feel, and the paper still tells you the house is breathing. And here's the free habit that turns a breeze into real degrees. The night flush. At dusk, when the porch rail stops feeling warm under your hand, open the house up. A low window on the cool, shaded side, and a box fan in a high window on the far side blowing out. 20 minutes and the whole house swaps its hot air for cool evening air. Come morning, shut it all and trap that cool inside. And the worry everybody raises first, leaving windows open at night where you don't feel safe, has an old answer. You only crack the ones you can secure. An upstairs sash, a window lock, or a vent stop that opens just 4 inches, or a box fan locked into the frame still pulls the night air through, with nothing left wide to the street. Cost? 0. Or a box fan you already own. The honest limit, and it's the big one. This only works when the night actually cools off and a little air is moving. On a dead still 85-degree night, opening up just lets the heat back in. That's exactly when you lean on trick 3, and on something the old stone houses did without thinking. Trick 3 is the slowest and the most powerful where it fits. Use the night and build the house to hold it. Here's the how, and old stone and brick houses did it by their very nature. Heavy materials, thick masonry walls, a brick floor, a tile hearth, even big jugs of water in a sunless room. Soak up the cool of the night and release it slowly through the hot day. You pair it with the night flush. Open up after dark to chill all that mass, then close the house and the blinds by mid-morning to keep the day's heat out and the stored cool in. Now the why. Think of a thick stone wall as a thermal battery. All night it charges up with cool. All day it discharges that cool into your rooms. So slowly the wall doesn't get warm until the sun's already going down. That's why a stone cottage feels cool at noon, while a thin, modern wall is already radiating heat at you by lunchtime. Feel it for yourself in any old building. On a hot afternoon, lay one hand flat on a thick brick or plaster wall and the other on an interior drywall partition. The masonry is noticeably cooler because it's still running on last night's cold. Point the infrared gun at both and you'll see the gap as a number. Now the honest limit, because this is where climate decides everything. Thermal mass and the night flush need 2 things: a big day-to-night swing and reasonably dry nights. The building scientists put the line at roughly a 20-degree swing, with nights dropping well below the indoor temperature you want. In the high desert, 100 at noon, 60 at midnight, this is the king of all cooling. On a humid Gulf Coast night that only sags to 78 and stays sticky, the swing's too small and the air too wet. The mass never recharges, and you're better off shading hard and keeping a fan on your skin. A light wood frame house gets a little of this. A heavy masonry one gets a lot. Trick 4 is the famous one. The $7 cool any room forever trick your feed keeps pushing. And this is the one that's real in one place and useless in another. So here's the straight version. What it is: evaporative cooling. A wet sheet hung in a breezy window, a damp cloth over a fan, the clay pot zier, the old swamp cooler. As water evaporates, it pulls heat straight out of the air. Now the why, and this one fact decides whether it helps you at all. Evaporation can only cool the air down toward what's called the wet bulb temperature, basically how much room the air still has to soak up water. In dry heat, that room is enormous. The Department of Energy says an evaporative cooler drops the air 15 to 40 degrees, and it feels like magic. In a muggy summer, the air is already nearly full of water, so the wet sheet barely cools at all, and all you've done is make a damp room damper. Here's the kitchen table version. Wrap the bulb of a thermometer in a wet paper towel and wave it in the air. Where the air is dry, the reading dives. Where it's humid, it barely budges. That gap is the trick, and it's why your climate, not the gadget, calls the shot. So here's the honest line on the map. If your summer afternoons are dry, the desert Southwest, the high plains, the interior West, anywhere the summer wet bulb runs about 70 or below, evaporative tricks are some of the best cheap cooling there is. If you live anywhere muggy, the Southeast, the Gulf, the humid Midwest in August, the wet cloth trick is the one to skip, and cools any room forever is just marketing that forgot to ask where you live. That's the catch every viral version leaves out. It was never whether the trick works. It's where you are. One more from the older pages of the Almanac, and it isn't a gadget at all, just sense. The old houses didn't only cool the building, the families moved with the heat. There was a reason for the summer kitchen out back. You did the hot work of cooking and canning away from the house, so you never heated the rooms you slept in. There was a reason for the sleeping porch, screened and open on the shaded side, where the whole family carried their beds on the worst nights. They cooled the people, not the whole house. The cheapest air conditioning ever invented. You can still borrow it, cook outside on the brutal days, run the hot appliances after dark, and set up to sleep and sit in the coolest, shadiest corner you've got. Sometimes the old way is just knowing which room to be in. So here's what you actually learned. Old houses weren't cooled. They were built to fight heat with physics, and you can copy it. 1. Block the sun first. Shade the roof and the west windows. Go light-colored. The biggest, cheapest win. 2. Let the house breathe. Cross-ventilate. Use the stack effect. Flush it with cool night air. 3. Use heavy materials to hold that night cool through the day. King in dry climates with a big swing. 4. Evaporative tricks. Wonderful in dry heat, useless where it's humid, no matter what the thumbnail promised. Shade it, breathe it, bank the night, and chase the wet cloth trick only if you live where the air is dry. In that order. That's a cooler house for between nothing and $20. Now your turn. Tell us 2 things in the comments. What state you're in, and what your upstairs hits on a bad afternoon. And if you grew up without air conditioning, the one thing your family did to get through the worst of it. We read every one, and your climate is exactly what decides which of these 4 to start with. If you want the one-page cooling map, which trick to use where you live, ranked, the free field edition is down in the description. Next time, the honest truth about homemade laundry soap, why the popular recipe can quietly ruin your towels, and the salt trick everyone's sharing that does nothing at all. Spend less. Live more. See you then.